5. Healing physical symptoms and illnesses. Having past life experiences often allows people to discard more than their fears. Physical symptoms or disease can disappear as well. Such events point again toward the validation of the concept of past lives, because imagination and fantasy do not cure chronic illnesses. Physical healings can be dramatic and rapid, permitting the patients to throw open the jail doors of disabilities and leave behind the constricting conditions that have been robbing their lives of joy. They are healthy again, mobile again, free again. And a healthier body allows more energy, more time, and more opportunity to accomplish the tasks that we were sent here to do. The body and the mind are interconnected. What heals one often heals the other. Stress can bring about physical disease as well as emotional illness. Remembering the past life trauma or event that has resulted in a current life physical symptom is often enough the cure. A deeper spiritual awareness inevitably accompanies the physical healing. If a wound to a past life body has resulted in a similar symptom in the present life body, the connecting consciousness or soul must be the bridge between the two. And we are that connecting consciousness, reaching across the years to manifest once again in physical form. The soul itself is never harmed, because its nature is spiritual and eternal. But the pain and disability of physical illness can cause great suffering and can hamper the soul's progress during the incarnation. Past life regression therapy can help people get rid of pain, breathe normally again, regain impaired or lost physical function and energy, and heal their hearts and other organs. Here are some fascinating cases of people who were able to regain their health by remembering their past life causes and other origins of their current life symptoms. Badge of Honor. The very first regression that I ever conducted proved to be quite meaningful. It took place at Omega in the summer of 2006. The client was an attractive woman in her early 30s with long blonde hair and blue eyes. She had sought me out, saying that she would appreciate it if I practiced performing a regression on her. After issuing a caveat of no promises, I agreed to do it that afternoon. She lay down on some pillows, and the regression took place on the floor in the big meeting room. Many others were in the room, practicing, performing, and receiving regressions. It was, to say the least, very loud in there. The woman was single, but had a long-standing relationship with her boyfriend. She had read Many Lives, Many Masters, although she did not know what to expect as far as the regression was concerned. I didn't know what to expect either. Her life in New York City seemed to be going pretty well. She did have one physical complaint, a back pain that she had had for most of her life. An accurate diagnosis of the cause of the pain had never been made. I wrote that down, making a mental note that it might be significant for the regression. Though I had not met or studied with Brian and Carol previously, I did have an essential grasp of how they conducted regressions. I had read all of Brian's books to that time and had listened to a number of his regression CDs. I still needed to read from the script with which I was provided in the class in order to stay on track, direct, and respond appropriately. Yet I was not nervous. Perhaps this was because I had been a psychotherapist for a long time by then. I guess you could say I took to regression like a duck to water. It came quite naturally to me, and I enjoyed the process. As I started to deepen the client for the third time, I began to see signs that she was very deep already. All of the muscles in her face were relaxed, and the muscles in her body seemed to be as well. Soon she had a beautiful remembrance of a birthday that she had as a young girl. She remembered her party, her friends who had come, and all of the gifts that she received. She couldn't get over how young and attractive her parents were. I let her linger there, drink it all in, as it were, and then began to take her back in time to another life and to an important memory that was waiting for her. Her eyes began to dart from side to side rapidly beneath their lids. I knew that was a sign that she was beginning to see things. She found herself in a wooded area, a deep forest. Looking down, she saw that she was wearing moccasins and carrying a bow. A quiver of arrows hung on her back, and she wore a deerskin breechcloth. She was a handsome young Native American male, and he was hunting. She began to mix expressions of how beautiful the woods were with statements of concern about being there. She was nervous, for it wasn't safe. I asked why, and she replied that there were 2 tribes fighting for the rights to the hunting ground, and that braves from both tribes had been killed in those woods because of this ongoing battle. She had spotted a deer and was about to draw her arrow when she suddenly felt another arrow strike her hard in the back. She fell to the ground. An Indian brave from the other tribe had shot her. Petrified with fear and in excruciating pain, she was on the ground, anticipating his approach. Her level of distress and perceived pain were palpable, and so great that I performed my first-ever float-above technique. It worked. As she began to float above and observe the scene, she became significantly calmer, and she began to describe what was happening below. The Indian who had shot her was now approaching with a tomahawk to kill her. Though she was now feeling no pain and reflecting a sense of detachment from what she was seeing, her breathing was still somewhat shallow and rapid, and her face began to show tremendous fear as he came closer. "He's going to finish me off with a tomahawk," she cried. To her amazement, as the other man lifted it to strike her, he changed his mind and slipped the weapon in its sheath. He bent down, lifted her up, and threw her over his shoulder. "He's taking me back to his village, maybe to torture me or kill me there. Perhaps he wants to mock me or make some kind of example of me, or hold me hostage," she said. The attacker carried the wounded brave into his village, described as a circle of about 20 teepees with a large common area in the middle. He brought her to the tribe's medicine man. As the village healer began to carefully remove the arrow and apply some kind of herb poultice on the wound, the chief of the tribe approached. He was not pleased. "Why have you brought this brave to our village? He should have been left dead in the woods as an example to the others who would steal our hunting ground," the chief said in anger. The young brave replied that these same Indians had long been at peace with their tribe, and that they should not be killing their brothers over hunting ground. He said he would not kill them, and that they should kill them no more. The chief was furious, and he asked the medicine man to finish off the wounded brave. "I don't kill my brothers. I heal them," the medicine man answered, as he began to wrap and cover the wound. "This brave is right. We should not kill our brothers, but make peace." I moved the client forward to the next important event. "It has been a few days, and I am well enough to walk. Several braves are walking with me to my village, on the bank of the river," she said. Their party was well received as the wounded brave explained what had happened and why they were there together, to make peace between the tribes. The chief of that tribe was visibly moved and thankful for the safe return of this brave. "Yes, this is good," he said. "For too long, too many of our braves have died for this hunting ground. In the past we have shared this ground. We will share it again. We will smoke the peace pipe and make war no more with our brothers." The treaty was agreed upon, the killing stopped, and the land was shared. The wounded brave made a complete recovery and lived a long life, during which he was somewhat revered as the instrument of peace that he had become. His passing was a calm one, surrounded by his family and friends. I asked the woman to identify the lessons of that lifetime. She seemed to be crying tears of joy. We had long lived as brothers in this place, helping each other and sharing our lives in many ways. Killing our brothers was wrong. The way of love is the only way. I was an instrument of peace in that life. What a beautiful lesson I lived to tell. I believe that I have been wearing my wounded back like a badge of honor in this life. Somewhere deep inside, I remembered this life and this honor, and I became confused. How were you confused? I wondered aloud. The place where my back hurts in this life is the same place where I was struck with that arrow so long ago. I became proud of that wound and would not let it go. I wore it like a badge of courage and honor, as it brought life and peace to both tribes," she said. Big tears were rolling down her cheeks. I asked if she had learned that lesson, if she could be proud of what she had helped the tribes achieve, but now set down this pain, as it no longer served her in this life. Yes, she said. She was ready now. Go ahead, then. Find a place to set it down and walk away from it. You don't need it anymore, I directed her. It was something to be very proud of, but it has served its purpose. Let it go. Lay the badge down. Still crying, she described how she laid the badge down on a stump in the forest, near where she was shot, and walked away. I then brought the client out of her trance state, gave her some time to readjust to the room, and asked her to tell me how she felt. She sighed heavily and said that she felt lighter, relieved, and very calm. Then, with a curious tone of awe, she added, "My back doesn't hurt any more. Not at all. It feels like I really did lay down that badge of honor. I don't hurt any more." I was equally amazed. Yes, you didn't need it any more. You realized where it came from, and you let it go. Wonderful, I said. Wonderful. I would regress 7 others that first week at Omega, but none were more significant or memorable than this first. Michael Brown. Michael is a talented and empathetic therapist, and he did an excellent job with his first regression. I always stress the importance of the life review because it sets a perspective for the entire lifetime as well as identifies connections to the current life. In this case, the physical healing of the client's chronic back pain was immediate when the causal connection to the arrow wound was discovered. This pattern of healing pain, psychosomatic disorders, and other physical symptoms and illnesses is a classical one, and it is often encountered when doing past life regressions. The life lesson of choosing peace and compassion over war and violence is both common and important. We are here to learn about love, kindness, and cooperation. We must renounce hatred and prejudice and overcome our fears. I would not be surprised if, in a subsequent past life memory or dream, Michael's client were to recognize the warrior who chose to spare her life in that ancient time as someone in her current life. The karmic bond between them is considerable. Such bonds help us to establish soulmate connections. Indigenous cultures often possessed great intuitive wisdom. They understood about balance and harmony, about moderation and simplicity, about caring for nature and the planet. They hunted for food and shelter, but they knew better than to eliminate species and to ruin living environments. They used only what they needed and did not accumulate obsessively or excessively. When we look at these cultures through the lens of past life therapy, a kind of regression archaeology, these noble traits and values consistently emerge. It would benefit us to remember our roots. In indigenous societies, shamans and other healers used natural substances to treat their people. As organized religions gained control, such healing practices became very dangerous for their practitioners. A 1,000-year Inquisition transpired. Valerie's story, which follows, depicts this long and dark nightmare. Inquisition illness. A call from the soul generally comes in one of 2 ways. For some, it is a knowing that grows into a deep conviction and leads to action. For others, it feels more like a whap on the head or being shaken until your teeth rattle, which serves to wake you up. This is what happened for me when I first read Many Lives, Many Masters. Fully engrossed in the wonderful stories, I came to the end of the book and flipped to the final page, where Brian's address jumped out at me. In that instant, I had a moment of déjà vu, when not only did I clearly see myself in America training with him, but also experienced a deep knowing that I had found my soul's purpose in regression work. I suddenly felt sure that this was what I was here to do. It was no small feat to pack up, leave a family, and venture off to the other side of the world on my own, but soul calls cannot be ignored. I can still remember the amazement of some of the other participants at his professional training in Rhinebeck, New York. "You've come from Australia?" they queried in disbelief. Although there were over 100 professionals there from all parts of the world, I had traveled the farthest. During this training, I was to experience a most powerful healing that took me completely by surprise. Brian was conducting stage regressions with selected audience members. How I longed to be one of them, but with so many of us eager to volunteer, he was only able to do a limited number of demonstrations before encouraging us to practice in small groups. Visualize over 100 people in a hall filled to capacity, with small group regressions going on everywhere, and you can imagine the noise level. I was feeling disappointed at not having a personal regression with Brian, and when it was my turn to be regressed, I clearly remember thinking as I lay down on the hard floor, "Yeah, like this is really going to work with all this racket going on." I was acutely aware of all the background noise as one of the women in my group led me through the induction process. My mind was wandering to different parts of the hall, hearing snatches of conversation here and there, when suddenly I felt my body jerking and my head turning to glance over my right side. I was to find out later that I had not moved my body at all at that point. In some amazement, I found myself looking down at the wooden wheel of a cart as it was jolting along a cobbled street. At the same time that my subconscious mind was registering this, I was clearly aware of my conscious mind thinking, that's why it's jolting, because it's carved out of one solid piece of wood. They couldn't get it perfectly round in those days." It was most bizarre to be experiencing something on one level and understanding it on another, and yet in that moment it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Shortly after, I became aware of an uncomfortable feeling of restriction in my legs, as if they were bound or tied in some way. Afterward, the women in my group told me that I was rubbing my two legs up and down against each other, as though I were trying to free them. Although I was unaware of this at the time, it later made perfect sense. Apparently it was the Inquisition, and I was being taken on a wooden cart to be burned at the stake as a witch, simply for practicing my healing arts. Strangely enough, I wasn't scared, just angry. How dare they punish me, and many others like me, for trying to help people who needed healing? I was frustrated by their stupidity rather than the act of violence itself, and I was aware that this feeling was directed specifically at the men. I have a vague recollection of flames and lots of jeering faces. 10 years later, the details are not as clear, but the experience itself is as vivid now as it was then. The whole experience seemed to last a few minutes. I found out that it had taken almost an hour. The restriction in my legs was indeed because they were bound with rope. What was even more amazing to me was that I had suffered very badly from psoriasis for the last 20 years, particularly on my legs, at the exact place where I had felt the ropes rubbing. In fact, I was so embarrassed about it that I always wore long pants rather than skirts or dresses, because it looked so unsightly. After the regression, my facilitator, a wonderful woman who was also there as a participant, told me that she felt intuitively that my anger with men was linked to the rash on my legs. Thankfully, someone had the presence of mind to suggest taking a photograph of my legs for future reference. I am thrilled to be able to enclose a recent photo, taken some 10 years later, which show my legs almost completely healed. The healing process started immediately after the regression, and it continued until they cleared, about 6 months later. Interestingly enough, I still experience a slight reoccurrence whenever I get stressed, which serves as a timely reminder to let go of any negative emotions surrounding my experience. I am now a regression therapist working from Perth, Western Australia, and seeing many similar experiences in my own clients. Brian's belief that our experiences are held within our cellular memories makes perfect sense when I reflect upon the emotional and physical healing that I and many of my clients experience during regression work. Once the memory is released and made conscious, the healing seems to automatically follow in most cases. I have even had a case of spontaneous healing from long-term pain in the breast, despite the fact that the woman I was regressing doubted that her experience was real. She later wrote to me to tell me that, to this day, her symptom has never returned. Valerie Coventry. This is a wonderful account of the power of past life therapy. Valerie's summary is so simply and clearly stated. Once the memory is released and made conscious, the healing seems to automatically follow in most cases. Psoriasis can be a very difficult condition to heal, but Valerie was able to accomplish such a feat just by remembering. In her case, she did not need medication, light therapy, or any other treatment. When using past life regression therapy to treat illnesses or symptoms more severe than psoriasis, conventional treatments can be continued while the client is experiencing the regressions. This is the essence of complementary medicine, the use of simultaneous therapeutic modalities. It does not matter which technique is the more effective one, as long as the cure is achieved. Valerie's regression demonstrates other features of a classical and real past life experience, in addition to the remission of symptoms. Her sense of time distortion, an hour seemed like a few minutes, is a sign of reaching a deep level of relaxation and concentration. At this level, fears can be dissolved and physical and/or emotional healing can be obtained. Ambient noise did not interfere, for her subconscious mind recognized the opportunity for healing and disregarded distractions. You do not need a sensory deprivation chamber to reach this deep, altered state. Also, her conscious mind was observing and commenting at the same time that she was experiencing the past life scenes. She understood about the wooden wheel, yet she stayed in the highly focused state. Valerie's case is a good one to reread and contemplate because it genuinely reveals the nuances and essence of past life regression therapy. Ancient allergies. It all began when I was enjoying a bowl of homemade taco soup at a nice local restaurant and began experiencing immediate rhinitis and eye itching. Thinking that I had come into contact with an allergen, I took a Benadryl and left the restaurant. Once I arrived home, my allergic reaction had turned into full anaphylaxis, and I had difficulty breathing. My face was red and swollen, my throat was closing quickly, and I began to panic. An emergency room trip was necessary, and by the time I arrived I was in deep anaphylactic shock and could not breathe. The nurse triaged me into the trauma room, not even stopping to ask me my name, started 2 IVs, called the respiratory technicians to give me breathing treatments, and administered epinephrine. I had all sorts of doctors and nurses at my bedside. Once I received the treatment, I became well fairly quickly. This was so frightening because I did not know what had caused the near-death reaction, but as a nurse, I knew that due to the timing it had to have been something that I ingested. The next day I returned to the restaurant and spoke directly with the chef, who was very helpful. He handed me individual baggies of the spices that he used in the taco soup, which I took to the allergist for skin testing. I had such a violent reaction to the cumin during the test that the allergist had to administer epinephrine in his office. He stated that he had never seen such a reaction to a spice. The allergist sent me to a research center in the hopes that they could figure out the severe reaction to cumin. After a week's worth of all sorts of poking and prodding, they could not determine what exactly was causing the reaction. They, too, had never seen anything like it. Over the next 6 years, I had some 5 anaphylactic reactions in different cities and from eating different foods that the waiters or chefs promised did not have cumin, but that actually ended up containing it in the flour or as one of the spices. This was verified after I had to be admitted to the emergency room. Truly, this was life-threatening, and even more troubling was the fact that cumin can be hidden in any prepared food or any type of spice. As a result, I began living on salad and ice cream. Meanwhile, I was so determined to do something to help myself that I contacted nutrition experts and allergists and emailed anyone and everyone that I could. I even thought that my anaphylaxis might be due to my breast implants, and I read volumes on the immune response to silicone. I had the implants removed, thinking it would be worth the chance if it helped. Unfortunately, shortly after I underwent surgery to have them removed, I experienced another anaphylactic reaction to food that, unbeknownst to the chef, contained cumin. Desperate for any type of alternative treatment, I turned on the television one day and saw Dr. Weiss as a guest speaker on the Oprah Winfrey Show. As he talked, for some strange reason, my ears perked up and I listened. Something just spoke to me, and I looked up past life regression on the Internet. I purchased 2 of Dr. Weiss's books and read more about this phenomenon. Another year or 2 went by, and I located a seminar in Chicago at which Dr. Weiss was going to speak. My daughter and I flew to Chicago, but after attending 3 past life regression sessions with Dr. Weiss, nothing happened. The last session at this seminar was Channeling with O'Brien. At the time I did not even know what the word channeling meant, but as we had 2 hours before our plane left to fly home, we went to this session. My daughter was chosen to pose a question to O'Brien. When she inquired about my anaphylactic reactions to cumin, he replied, "Oh, I know, and she is also allergic to 2 other spices." My daughter asked how we could treat it, and O'Brien replied that I would need past life regression because I had been killed by this spice unintentionally in 2 past lives. I was shocked. I was able to locate a woman in Houston, Texas, who could help me work through a past life experience. In one former life, I was about 5 months pregnant and feeling very nauseated. My neighbor tried to help with my symptoms, offering me some spice and water. I remember that my dress was white, the bed was made of wood, and the house was a log cabin with dirt floors. It was probably sometime in the 19th century. I was in my early 20s, and we were the only 2 who were at home at the time. The woman made a mistake and put too much cumin in the water to try to settle my stomach, and it resulted in my death. I felt so guilty that I had killed my baby inside me that I cried. The past life regressionist asked me to locate the baby's soul, but I could not. I realized then that I was not really pregnant, as I had thought. It was a tumor, but back in those days there were no tests to determine this, and because my abdomen was getting bigger, I had assumed I was pregnant. Once I knew that I was not responsible for ending the life of my baby, and that indeed it was a tumor, I felt fine. I went back to the allergist for a follow-up skin test with cumin, and this time it was negative. Every single previous skin test had been positive. In fact, he had me get some Mexican food with cumin and eat it in his office while his nurse was personally assigned to observe me. There was no reaction. This was amazing. I felt like I had a life again. Indeed, discovering my past life gave me my present life back. Sandy. Not being too familiar with cumin myself, I did some research after reading Sandy's story and learned that it is one of the oldest and most widespread spices. Although commonly used in chili powder and curry, it is, as Sandy knows all too well, found in a number of unexpected places: cheese, bread, liquor, medicine, and perfume. In South Asia, the tea made from cumin seeds is a traditional remedy for gastrointestinal problems and indigestion, and morning sickness. Sandy, in the 19th century, who believed herself to be pregnant and who suffered from stomach pain, was given cumin tea for exactly these reasons. But Sandy from the 21st century had no idea such practices even existed. Trust the process. Sandy did indeed need to remember a specific past life in order to cure her severe cumin allergy. She flew to Chicago, but the therapist who would eventually orchestrate the healing was in Houston, Texas. To get there, she had to turn on her television and find me on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Then she had to fly to Chicago, try 3 group regressions, coincidentally drop into the channeling session later that weekend, and have her daughter picked to ask a question, which confirmed the past life causation. She went to Houston and learned the specific details. The life-threatening allergy disappeared, even to a direct challenge in the doctor's office. There is a wise, loving, and infinitely compassionate intelligence guiding all our lives, all the time. Our deep intuitive wisdom can access this process, can discern the direction, and can be in contact with the divine. In a past life memory that took place in Norway several hundred years ago, Margaret fell off a plow. She had never been there in her present life, but she knew it was Norway. She fell backward onto her upper shoulders and neck, at the place where they meet at the back of the head. Her shoulder and neck pain in this life, which was severe and disabling, had disappeared by the next day. Natalia remembered a past life as a child in Europe centuries ago, one in which she had to hide her psychic abilities, healing skills, and knowledge of herbs. Her family members were also forced to conceal their talents, for they would be killed if the authorities discovered them. Years later, as a young woman in that same life, she spoke out and was burned at the stake, confirming the dangers of going public at that time. In a connected past life, she was killed on the rack for being a witch, merely for healing with herbs. In her present life, Natalia's significant joint pain improved after these two memories. I received a message from an Australian woman telling me that she had been afflicted with severe arthritis in her hands for over a decade. She was resigned to living with the pain. After attending my workshop in Brisbane in 2011, she had no pain in her hands, nothing. The healing, she said, had been powerful and intense. Another person who had also attended the very same event in Brisbane wrote in with her own story of healing. As a Hindu, she had learned about reincarnation early on. However, she had never known that meditation and past life regression could actually heal. This woman had suffered from asthma since childhood, and daily relied on her inhaler. A month after the workshop, she had recovered from this ongoing illness. Quieting the mind and opening the doors to the past can literally help us to breathe easier. People who remember past life memories or have spiritual experiences are often able to heal or to greatly ameliorate acute and chronic physical ailments, including arthritis, migraines, asthma, uncontrolled bleeding, severe pain, joint problems, and even ocular stroke. The people who have written the following 4 stories come from incredibly divergent backgrounds and cultures, yet their stories are strikingly similar. Healing Mind and Body. I have read all your books, and they changed my life. Around 2003, I was on a faith breakdown because of many things that happened. One day, my mother's co-worker gave her your first book, saying that she might find it life-changing, and he was right. We both read it, and I believe that she and I grew in every respect. I had an accident in 1998 that almost killed me. I was close to losing my left leg. For a long time, I asked myself why it happened. I saw myself in a past life in which I died very young because of an accident that severed my left leg. I lived in a beautiful hacienda-style house. I knew the people around me. My mom was my older sister, and my cousin was the middle sister. Also, my grandmother was our mom. I believe that is why we are so close and loving to each other. I saw how I died. I saw all the preparations that were made for the funeral. Later, I found out that what I had seen was traditional for wealthy families in Spain around the year 1800. After my meditations, I realized that having deep scars from the accident in this lifetime was not the worst thing that could happen. It has helped me deal with the pain to a point that it does not bother me anymore. On another occasion, I saw myself as a young lady in a big castle-like house. I had a sister that I recognize as my oldest cousin. I knew my dad. He is my father in this life. He was a powerful person. I had a fixed marriage with the man who is now my husband. I felt as happy as I am now. At first, I couldn't make any sense of it. Later, I was told that it was a response to a question I had had for a long time. It was true. I always asked myself if I had made a good decision getting married. Since then, I don't feel that insecurity. I went to your Orlando workshop in 2010 with my mom and cousin, who flew from another country to be there. That day I had the occasion to permanently get rid of a pain in my left hip that had been bothering me for months. Since then, I have practiced the meditations every time I can, and they have helped me with the arthritis in my left knee. Jessica. Jessica's faith breakdown has been reversed because of her courage, her motivation to help herself, and the therapeutic power of her regression. She has not only been healing her left leg and hip, but also uncovering past life connections to many family members. Her private questions were being answered. Her doubts and insecurities were being resolved. Physical issues were repaired through regression in the case of Maria's client as well. Migraine memories. I am a social worker who has been doing hypnotherapy and past life regressions in my private practice work since I attended one of the week-long Omega trainings in 2001. I am passionate about opening people to the existence of the afterlife and to their immortal souls. In addition to individual sessions, I do workshops and local TV and radio shows to let people know about our work. I always use this story as an example of healing through past lives. David was a 35-year-old man who came to see me as a last resort. He had been suffering with severe migraines since the age of 22, when he joined the Navy. He had tried conventional medical treatments to no avail. The migraines affected his schooling, his jobs, as he lost time at work and would ultimately lose the job, and his career. We uncovered 3 past lives in which he died from a blow to the head. In the most significant one, he was in the Navy during the Spanish-American War. He had served on a ship in the Caribbean, shoveling coal. When he was 22 years old, his co-worker accidentally hit him in the head with the shovel, leaving him paralyzed and in a wheelchair. He was discharged and lived another year in excruciating pain and depression until his death. David's migraines improved significantly after the regression, and they have become more manageable. Each area of the head where his migraines occurred in this life corresponded to one of the 3 blows that he had suffered in past lives. Maria Castillo. Migraine headaches have plagued mankind for millennia. Although effective new medicines have been developed, all medications cause side effects. Remembering past lives is non-invasive and has no side effects. It allows migraines to be alleviated while spiritual insights and wisdom are being achieved. David has greatly benefited from this approach. Dr. K.C. Weiss, who shares his story with us next, did not perform past life regressions on his patients, as Maria did. Instead, he used all the tools in his arsenal as a surgeon here in the physical plane to help heal them, and then asked the heavenly realms for a consultation. There is so much more to these miracles than modern medicine can even begin to explain. Guardian Angels. My daughter is a clinical psychologist from India who is trained in the United States. She has read your books, as have I. Once she told me about guardian angels. In case of difficult situations, we in India call on God and others, such as Hanumanji, Bhairavji, and Ganeshji, to come and rescue us. I would like to share one experience that I had with these angels. I was operating on a gallbladder case. After I removed it, there was torrential bleeding from the liver bed, where the gallbladder is attached. Within a minute, the patient lost 500 milliliters of blood. I packed the bed. Only 1 unit of blood was available. I could not know the source of the bleeding, so I packed and prayed. I invited the guardian angels to help and rescue the patient. She was moved to the ICU, where her situation was managed. After 72 hours, I took the patient for a relaparotomy to remove the pack. With all precautions, I reopened the abdomen and took the pack out, and the bleeding occurred once more. I repacked and prayed for the angels, calling to them for assistance. To my surprise, the bleeding stopped. The area became absolutely dry, as if no bleeding had ever occurred. To this day, I do not know the source of the bleeding. The patient survived thanks to the guardian angels. I had another case in which I operated on an elderly male for a bleeding duodenal ulcer, performing a laparotomy and duodenotomy to litigate the bleeding vessel. On the 5th day, it leaked. This would normally lead to a duodenal fistula with high output fluid loss and death. In the night and on the next morning, I prayed to Almighty and asked him to come and seal it or else put his thumb there. It was done. There was no leak, and the patient was later discharged. He is alive today. Prayers are heard. The whole universe conspires for the well-being of the patient. K.C. Weiss. Grace is the intervention, the reaching down from heaven to earth by a wise and loving divine force in order to help us in some way. Is this force what we call God? Perhaps all energies and manifestations, people, animals, plants, rocks, anything in physical form, come from one supreme source, whether you call this source God, a higher power, or any other name. And so we are all born from the divine, for the divine is in every atom of our being. Can angels reach down too? Perhaps all higher beings are intermediaries from God to earth, and are all manifestations of the source energy. If angels are the children of God, then we are the grandchildren. To approach everybody and everything with compassion and caring concern is to recognize the common divinity that we all share. Another remarkable case of physical healing is presented by Miriam. Perfect vision. I had an ocular stroke in my left eye approximately 4 years ago. I was, at that time, driving back and forth between my home in Stuart, Florida, and my daughter's home in Port St. Lucie. My daughter is a full-time attorney who had just given birth to her first child, and Grandma Miriam was the caretaker. We would meet at the courthouse at 8 in the morning. She would give me her baby, and I would care for him all day. It was an ongoing ritual, one that I treasured. However, the stress involved with driving on I-95 so often evidently took a toll on my left eye, which had previously been injured. The prior injury had occurred about 30 years ago, when I was teaching at a high school. I was crossing through the large gymnasium when a basketball hit me in the face. During this same time period, I was involved in a car accident which also could have added trauma to this eye. I have had quite a bit of trouble driving on I-95, as the ocular stroke affected my vision so that I saw only large, wavy, gray horizontal lines going across the left eye. I could not see out of it. When I asked the doctors about my vision, they said there was nothing that could be done. I attended your workshop at the Tampa Convention Center. You had us do an exercise that involved relaxing and getting rid of pain. I returned from Tampa to my home in Stuart that Sunday evening and discovered that I could see out of my left eye. I no longer have the wavy strokes. This eye certainly does not see as well as the right eye. However, driving home from Tampa was a breeze, and I wondered why. Now I know. Miriam. In my workshops, I repeatedly help people reach deep levels of peace and focused concentration. At these depths, fear and illnesses can be dissolved. Body and mind become incredibly relaxed. Healing through past life recall, or by enhanced perspective and understanding, or in other ways, frequently occurs. Sometimes the removal of symptoms is so subtle that the person is not aware until hours later. Miriam had suffered from a constant lack of vision in her left eye for several years, until one afternoon at a workshop in Tampa, when she could see again. The eyes are said to be the windows of the soul. A person's eyes may be bursting with wonder and enthusiasm, looking upon each experience as an adventure, seeing everything afresh. This may be one of their first go-rounds here on the earth, and they delight in its spectacles. The eyes of an old soul have seen it all before, and they are vast libraries of time immemorial. You might look into the eyes of an infant born mere minutes ago to find that she is 1,000 years old. Their limitless warmth and wisdom belie her true age. and with a sudden electric jolt, the eyes are often quick to inform us that the stranger is a soulmate, whereas the mind is slower to recognize this truth. Eye contact is actually soul contact. Imagine how much our eyes have seen throughout our incarnations, the horrors, the beauty, the bliss. They have watched as time has traveled, transmuted, transcended. They have surveyed the terrain of every country on every continent, of the slopes of the moon, of the face of God. They have glimpsed enlightenment and, perhaps, with each successive lifetime, held its gaze longer and longer. For eternities they have looked down at our bodies, first this one, now that one, and then another one entirely, knowing that this is not who we are. As we enter the hypnotic state during a regression, we close the eyes, and that is when we begin to see. With all that we have rested our eyes upon in our many returns to human life, it is no wonder that afflictions from a past life can manifest in them. Miriam's sight was restored after participating in an exercise at my workshop, as was my daughter Amy's, whose story concludes this chapter. Sight Unseen. As the daughter of Brian Weiss, I have been asked many times about my own regressions and if I have discovered all my past lives. The truth is, although I have been to hundreds of my father's workshops, I rarely have any experiences. Perhaps it's because, to me, that's just Dad up there. Or perhaps it's because I have memories of being 6 or 7 years old, sitting at my brother's baseball games, while my father attempted to hypnotize me into clucking like a chicken. In any case, I've come to expect that when participating in one of his group regressions, I will not relive a past life, but will probably have a most relaxing nap. Several years ago, I was working at a hospital in Philadelphia that was devoted to the holistic treatment of breast cancer patients. Many of the staff, some of whom were Reiki practitioners, had come to work at the hospital because of its dedication to complementary medicine. Needless to say, if they were not already familiar with my father's work, they were certainly the type of people to be open to it. So, on a visit to see my brother and me, my father was kind enough to hold an intimate in-service at the hospital for all its employees. The one workshop where I would be least likely to have any kind of regression experience would be one in a professional setting where I was quite conscious of being surrounded by my coworkers and particularly my bosses. So, of course, that's where it happened. Before I go any further, let me back up and give you a little medical history. When I was 25 years old, I went in for a routine eye exam because I wanted a new pair of glasses, and my prescription tends to need tweaking every few years. I was mystified when the technician told me that I had a cataract. I'd always associated those with people who were, I'll try to be tactful here, well over the age of 25. She recommended that I have it looked into immediately. I can remember sitting in the parking lot afterward, calling my parents on my cell phone and saying, "I have cataracts?" I saw several ophthalmologists, had numerous tests done, and even had state-of-the-art photographs taken of my eyes. All were in agreement. I had cataracts, a few actually, and they were congenital, meaning that I had been born with them. That was puzzling to me. For a completely different concern, I had had extensive testing of my eyes done as a child, and no cataracts had been found then. Surely, if I had been born with them, they would have been discovered at that time, or at least at some point prior? In any event, over the next few years, it seemed that every time I would have my eyes examined, more and more cataracts, as well as a variety of other eye issues, would pop up. I was told that some of the more severe ones could even result in the permanent loss of my sight. No one was really sure why I had these conditions, and they would gently tease me about being their youngest patient. By that point, I had become a little anxious. What was going to happen to my eyes? Why was it happening so quickly? And why did I seem to suddenly have the eyes of an old man? When my father was conducting the group regression at the hospital that day, he asked the attendees to think about a particular physical illness or symptom and to go back to a past life that would explain it. We had recently been discussing my situation, So I caught his eye, and he smiled. That instruction, while certainly relevant for most everyone in the room, had been intended for me. Still, I hardly expected to go back to a past life, or see more than a glimpse of one, as I had never done so before, despite many years of trying. Much to my surprise, I immediately saw myself as an old man living in the Middle Ages, perhaps the 14th or 15th century. I knew that I was in the forests of Germany or France. It was difficult to tell, not because I couldn't see it clearly, but because I lived so deep within the woodlands that man-made boundaries were irrelevant. My name was Althramus or Althrymus, although I've never been able to verify that a name like that existed. I was around 50 or 60 years old, with a long, worn face and white hair. The small stone hut in which I lived was circular, with a thatched roof. There was only one room, and it was exceptionally simple, yet cozy. In my present life, I've always felt at home in little cottages or rooms that others might find confining. I could see myself venturing out into the woods every day, collecting stones and leaves and herbs, and then examining them or placing them around my house. The neighboring townspeople called me a wizard, although I was far from intelligent and hardly in possession of any special powers. In truth, I was developmentally disabled. They simply saw me spending so much time with natural objects and assumed that I must have been using them for magic. They didn't understand. I could not have cared less about people, much less influencing their behavior. I was no more a wizard than a little boy out in the dirt picking up worms. A more accurate term would have been naturalist. I never went into town. I lived alone and rarely communicated with other people. My home was the forest, and I was content there. I was a simple man, and nothing pleased me more than being by myself, puttering around in the woods and in my house. This made me smile during the regression, for I recognized that some of these characteristics, although not to such an extreme, had carried over into my present life. But the townspeople, believing that I was up to no good, formed a mob and came storming with their torches into the forest, burning down everything inside and around my house. Not just my possessions, although they consisted of little more than my collection of rocks and jars with oddities inside them, but all the forest around me, those beautiful trees, those friends of mine. I had been inside my hut at the time, and had been forced to flee from them, running away and leaving my home and my life as I knew it forever. However, before I escaped, the fire had permanently blinded me. I could see the man standing before me and pulling down his lower lids to show me his eyes, which had been covered over in a milky white film. "Oh, Althramus," I said inside my mind, overcome with compassion for this man who was so deeply sad and grieving. He was I, of course, but I was seeing him from the 21st century perspective of our soul. The man that I was then was consumed by his psychological pain. He could not understand why other people would purposely cause him such devastation, he who never had contact with them and wanted nothing more than to be left alone. He literally would not hurt a fly. I know this, for he spent his days seeking them out and befriending them. Perhaps he couldn't wrap his mind around it because of his intellectual disabilities, or perhaps because it's simply impossible for a mind to wrap around senseless brutality. As stupid as I may have been then, the villagers were the ones who acted out of ignorance. It wasn't the loss of my home or my sight that so strongly overwhelmed me. It was the knowledge that these townspeople were willing to destroy my life over some ill-conceived witch hunt, some mistaken impression that I was performing sorcery or evil, concepts that I could not even fathom. Even though far worse things happen to people all the time, even now, in this day and age, I was bitterly angry and self-pitying, and clearly not averse to playing the victim. Althramus never overcame his feelings of sheer despair. Like quicksand, they engulfed and swallowed him. My heart linked into his, and I felt his pain as though it were my own, which of course it was, although at the same time it was not. I sat there in the chair in front of all my co-workers, tears streaming down my face as I cried in compassion. It was then that my father asked the group if there were any messages to be learned from the life that we were experiencing. In response, Alphramus kept pointing at his useless white eyes. "Sadness clouds the eyes," he told me. The message's double meaning instantly struck me. A cataract is, of course, a clouding of the lens of the eye. Alphramus's eyes had physically clouded over as a result of having been burned. My eyes had physically clouded over as a result of having been Alphramus. He had never let go of that heavy sorrow, not even after he died, not even after he reincarnated into the body that I now inhabit. As a result, I, too, have allowed it to cloud my vision of what Earth is like, of whether people are good, of whether I am safe, of whether life is painful. Certainly in this lifetime I have had my own share of sadness, as has everyone, which sometimes felt like it would never dissipate. Maybe I had been letting that dark, intractable cloud continue to hang over my head, to obscure my vision in this life. Maybe my eyes were indeed broken, although not in the way that I'd understood them to be. As meaningful as this connection was at the time, I basically forgot about it. Then, a few years later, I was fortunate enough to get an appointment at Bascom Palmer, a nationally recognized center for ophthalmology. The doctor, a renowned specialist in the field, was able to examine my cataract. This time, however, the description was very different. "There's only one cataract," she told me, "and it's not congenital at all. It was the result of trauma." She drew a picture of my lens for me on paper, showing me how some unknown traumatic event had damaged my eye. I didn't have to worry. It wouldn't grow any more because it was a once-in-a-lifetime event, as she put it. She couldn't have had any idea that that lifetime was in the Middle Ages. It wasn't affecting my vision, she added, and it wasn't going to. Sure enough, 6.5 years after my initial diagnosis, when I went for another prescription-tweaking eye exam, I was told that I had no cataracts at all. How funny that I'd heard so many times that this was something I'd been born with, but after remembering a past life in which I was blinded both literally and metaphorically, it had now become the opposite. It seems both impossible and yet perfectly possible that the past life recall may have been responsible for this reversal. Interestingly, when I was becoming certified in hypnosis some 3 years after the regression at the hospital, I learned how to hypnotize myself. One day I became curious whether I could, in a self-induced trance, revisit Alphramus and talk to him. So I did. I met with him in his little burnt hut as we sat down and caught up on the past 700 years. I filled him in on everything that he and I had become. I told him how I played the harp, and his face lit up because he knew what a harp, that common medieval instrument, was. I told him how I liked to write. Alphramus was not intelligent or educated enough to ever know how to read, much less write. He was absolutely beaming, his face bursting with pride as he heard that his future self was literate. But perhaps the most fun and challenging part was telling him how I enjoyed photography as a hobby. It taxed my modern brain to try to explain to him what a camera was and how it worked. He was fascinated by the concept, his expression growing intense as he, this man from the Middle Ages, leaned forward in his chair to listen and to imagine what a photograph might possibly be. In this life, I like few things better than being alone out in nature, photographing the birds and flowers, and Al was delighted to know that his love of the woods had lived on and was now actually being recorded for posterity. He and I are still learning how to see the world clearly. It has been a process that has spanned centuries and lifetimes, and it may take even longer. But I think we would both agree that we are ready for the clouds to be lifted from our eyes. Amy Weiss. From the time that she was a baby, Amy could light up a room. Her light was soft and soothing, an inner light, more like a paper lantern than a fiery torch. Her light was gentle compassion, and she always tended to animals and nature. As she gained knowledge, her physical eyes cleared. But the eyes of her heart were always clear and open, and, like an eagle's penetrating gaze, could see through deception and hypocrisy to a person's inner core. Our hearts see what our eyes cannot. Nearly 800 years ago, the Zen monk Dogen Zenji wrote, "Approach all things and all beings with a face of kindness." His words were wise and true then, and they remain so now. From the beginning of human history, kindness has been recognized as a supreme virtue. When our hearts open and overflow with benevolence, love, and compassion, mankind reaches its highest potential. Althramus, a simple man, was able to feel and express kindness to everything in his environment, to animals, and to all of nature. He was not distracted by education and intellect. Like a child, he was able to maintain his native innocence until the violent mob robbed him of his joy as well as his sight. To rob people of their happiness and joy is a terrible act. To nurture people and to help them achieve peace, happiness, and the fulfillment of their dreams is a divine one. Amy is the spiritual essence or soul connecting her lifetimes. She is not a particular body or mind. Rather, she is the continuing and eternal essence. She is immortal, as are we all. And so Althramus, at the end of his lifetime, never really died. Only his body died, but he lived on, reincarnating as Amy later in the 20th century. To recognize ourselves as the soul, not the body, changes how we perceive our deaths, as well as the deaths of our loved ones, because we are always being reconnected, in spirit and on earth. The next chapter depicts our immortality very clearly, and shows how the awareness of eternity can loosen the suffocating grip of grief.